I woke up to the sound of someone hammering on my front door at 7 in the morning, which was never a good sign in the quiet subdivision of Meadowbrook Estates, just outside of Burlington, Vermont. My name is Lucas Owens, and I had lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, long before the Homeowners Association turned into what I can only describe as a power-hungry miniature government. I threw on a flannel shirt over my thermal underwear and trudged downstairs, already feeling the bite of the January cold seeping through the walls. Through the frosted glass panel beside my door, I could make out the unmistakable silhouette of Patricia Morrison, the current HOA president. She had that distinctive stance of someone who believed they owned not just their property but everyone else's too. I opened the door to find her standing there with two men I didn't recognize, both wearing matching navy blue jackets that said Morrison's Towing and Recovery on the back. "Can I help you?" I asked, my breath visible in the frigid air. "Mr. Owens, I'm here on official HOA business," Patricia announced, holding up a clipboard like it was some kind of legal warrant. "Your tractor with the snowplow attachment is in violation of Section 12.4 of the Meadowbrook Estates Covenant, which clearly states that no commercial vehicles or equipment may be stored on residential properties." I blinked at her, not quite processing what she was saying. "Patricia, that's not a commercial vehicle. That's my personal tractor that I use to maintain my property and help clear the neighborhood roads. The covenant doesn't make exceptions based on how you personally classify your equipment," she said, her voice dripping with that particular kind of satisfaction people get when they think they've caught someone breaking the rules. "I've been president for 3 months now, and I'm committed to ensuring all residents comply with our community standards." "You've got to be kidding me," I said, the cold now fully waking me up along with a surge of irritation. "It's January in Vermont. We just got 18 inches of snow 2 days ago, and there's another storm coming tonight. That's not my concern. The rules are the rules." She gestured to the two men behind her. "These gentlemen are here to remove the equipment from your property. If you want to contest this action, you can submit a formal appeal to the HOA board, but the equipment will remain impounded until the matter is resolved." I looked past her to where my orange Kubota tractor sat in my driveway, the snowplow blade I had attached to it still crusted with snow from clearing my driveway yesterday. "This is insane. You can't just take my property." "Actually, according to the covenant you signed when you purchased your home, the HOA has the right to remove any items in violation of community standards. You'll receive a formal notice in the mail with information about retrieval and any associated fees." She nodded to the tow truck driver who was already backing up his flatbed into my driveway. "Fees? You're charging me to steal my tractor. Impound fees, storage fees, and administrative processing fees," Patricia said, checking items off on her clipboard. "It's all standard procedure." I stood there in my doorway, watching in disbelief as these strangers loaded my tractor onto the flatbed. The whole operation took maybe 20 minutes, and then they were gone, leaving deep tire tracks in the snow that covered my driveway. Patricia handed me a pink carbon copy of some form before she left, offering me a smile that I'm sure she thought was professional but looked more like a smirk to me. After they left, I went back inside and actually read the form. According to the document, my tractor was being held at a storage facility in Williston, about 30 minutes away. To retrieve it, I would need to pay a $300 impound fee, a $50 per day storage fee, and a $75 administrative fee. I would also need to provide proof that I had either removed the snowplow attachment or secured an alternative storage location off the property. I called my neighbor, Tom Richardson, who had lived in Meadowbrook Estates even longer than I had. "Tom, did Patricia Morrison come by your place this morning?" "Lucas, hey, no, why would she? What's going on?" "She just seized my tractor. Said it violates the covenant about commercial vehicles." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Your orange Kubota." "The one you use to clear the roads." "That's the one." "Jesus, Lucas, that woman has lost her mind. She's been sending out violation notices left and right since she took over." Dave got dinged for having his trash cans visible from the street, and the Hendersons got cited because their mailbox post is apparently the wrong shade of white. "This is different though, Tom. That tractor isn't just for show. I use it for actual work around here." "What do you mean?" I realized Tom didn't know, and probably nobody in the neighborhood knew, except for maybe the older residents who had been around when the subdivision was first developed. "Tom, I'm the one who maintains the water line access points throughout the neighborhood." "I thought the water company did that." "No, the subdivision has a private water system. It connects to the municipal supply at the main line on Route 289, but from there, it's all private infrastructure that runs throughout Meadowbrook Estates. When they developed this place back in the early 2000s, the builders set it up that way to save money. The HOA is technically responsible for maintenance, but they contracted it out to my uncle back in 2005. When he retired in 2010, I took over." "You're telling me you maintain the water for the entire neighborhood?" "All 247 homes, yes. There are 6 main access points where I need to check pressure valves, clear debris from the housings, and make sure nothing freezes during winter." "That's why I need the tractor, Tom. Some of those access points are in areas you can't reach with a regular vehicle, especially in winter. One of them is half a mile down that service road behind the retention pond. Another one is up near the north property line where the ground is too rough for a regular truck." "Does Patricia know about this?" "I don't know what Patricia knows. The previous president, Bill Martinez, he and I had a good working relationship. I'd send him a monthly report and everything was fine. But Bill moved to Florida in October and Patricia took over in November. I sent her the same report I always send, but I never heard back from her." Tom let out a low whistle. "Lucas, you need to call her right now and explain this." "I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to the HOA office." The Meadowbrook Estates HOA operated out of a small office building near the neighborhood entrance, sharing space with a real estate agent and a tax preparation service. I drove over there in my pickup truck, which was significantly less useful than my tractor, but at least hadn't been seized yet. The snow was starting to fall again, light flurries that the weather service said would develop into the major storm they had been predicting all week. Inside, the office was overheated and smelled like artificial lavender. Patricia sat behind a desk that seemed too large for the small room, and she looked up from her computer with an expression of surprise when I walked in. "Mr. Owens, I didn't expect to see you so soon. If you're here to argue about the impound, I should tell you that the decision is final unless you go through the formal appeals process." "I'm here to explain something you apparently don't understand," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I maintain the water system for this neighborhood. That tractor you just seized is essential equipment for me to do that job." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Owens, the water system is maintained by the Burlington Water District." "No, it's not. The main line is theirs, but everything inside Meadowbrook Estates is private. It's all in the original development documents. The HOA contracted the maintenance to me 10 years ago. I've reviewed all the HOA contracts since I took office, and I haven't seen anything about water system maintenance. Did you check the archives?" "Some of the older contracts aren't digitized yet. Bill Martinez kept them in the file cabinet in the back room. Patricia's expression shifted slightly, a crack in her confident facade. The back room is full of boxes. I haven't had time to go through all of that yet. I've been focused on immediate compliance issues. Patricia, this is an immediate issue. We have 6 main access points throughout the neighborhood that need regular monitoring, especially in winter. If a valve freezes or a housing gets blocked, sections of the neighborhood could lose water pressure or worse. And I need that tractor to access some of those points. I'm sure we can arrange for a proper commercial service to handle that if what you're saying is true. If what I'm saying is true, I've been doing this for 10 years. Check your bank records. The HOA pays me $400 a month for this service, has been for a decade. It's automatically deposited on the 1st of every month. Patricia turned to her computer and started typing, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. I watched as her expression changed from skeptical to confused to something that might have been concern. There is a recurring payment for $400 to Lucas Owens. The memo says water system maintenance. I thought that was for something else. For what else? I don't know. I assumed it was some kind of settlement or legacy payment. We have several of those for various things. She looked up at me. Why wouldn't this be documented more clearly in the current files? Because Bill Martinez knew what he was doing and he kept good records. You just haven't looked at them yet. Well, regardless, the covenant violation stands. If you need to access these water points, I'm sure you can rent appropriate equipment or we can hire a commercial service. I felt my frustration building. Patricia, you understand what I'm telling you. There's a major storm coming tonight. The forecast says we could get another 2 feet of snow. I need to check those access points before the storm hits, and I need to be able to reach them during and after the storm if there are any problems. The tractor you seized is specifically equipped for this work. It has the ground clearance, the weight distribution, and the attachment points I need to carry tools and equipment to those locations. Then you should have made sure your equipment was in compliance with community standards. I stared at her, trying to understand how someone could be this obstinate in the face of logic. You know what, Patricia? Fine. I'll go through your appeals process. I'll rent equipment if I have to. But you better hope nothing goes wrong with the water system in the meantime. Is that a threat, Mr. Owens? It's a fact. I'm telling you as someone who has maintained this system for 10 years that there are risks involved with winter maintenance, and those risks increase significantly when I don't have access to the right equipment. But you're the president, so you make the call. I left the office before I said something I would regret. The snow was falling harder now, and the temperature was dropping. According to my phone, it was currently 19 degrees and expected to fall into the single digits overnight. The storm would hit around 6 in the evening and continue through most of tomorrow. Back at home, I started making phone calls. First, I called the equipment rental place in Burlington, but they didn't have anything comparable to my Kubota available, and they certainly didn't have anything with a snowplow attachment ready to go. The best they could offer was a small, compact tractor that might arrive by tomorrow afternoon if the roads were passable. Next, I called every member of the HOA board that I could find contact information for. There were 5 board members total, including Patricia. I reached 2 of them, Jennifer Hartwell and Marcus Webb. Jennifer seemed genuinely surprised to hear about the tractor seizure and said she would look into it. Marcus was more dismissive, saying that if Patricia had made the decision as president, he was sure she had good reasons. By early afternoon, the snow was coming down steadily, and I decided I needed to at least try to check the access points on foot. I loaded my pickup truck with as many tools as I could carry in a backpack and started making my rounds. The first two access points were relatively easy to reach, both located near neighborhood streets that were still passable by truck. I cleared the snow away from the metal housings and checked the pressure valves inside. Everything looked good, though the temperature was dropping faster than I liked. The third access point was where things got difficult. It was located behind the retention pond, accessed by a narrow service road that was now buried under nearly 2 feet of snow. I tried driving my truck down it, but the wheels lost traction about 100 yards in. This was exactly the kind of situation where I needed the tractor. The Kubota, with its all-wheel drive and heavy frame, could have handled this terrain easily. I got out and started walking, trudging through snow that came up to my knees in some places. The service road continued for almost half a mile, winding through a wooded area before reaching the access point. It took me 40 minutes to walk there, and by the time I arrived, I was sweating under my winter clothes despite the cold. The access point was a metal housing about 4 feet square, set into a concrete pad. I cleared the snow away and opened the housing. Inside, I could see the main valve assembly and the pressure gauge. The gauge read 32 psi, which was lower than I wanted to see. The optimal range was between 40 and 50 psi. A reading of 32 meant there was some kind of restriction or blockage somewhere in the line. I spent another 20 minutes checking all the visible components, clearing ice from the valve housing, and making sure everything was functioning properly. The pressure came up slightly, to 35 psi, but it still wasn't where it should be. I would need to check the other access points to determine where the problem was originating. The walk back to my truck was even worse than the walk in, as the wind had picked up and was blowing snow directly into my face. By the time I reached the truck, it was nearly 4 in the afternoon, and the storm was intensifying. The fourth and fifth access points were even more remote than the third, and I knew I wouldn't be able to reach them on foot, especially not in these conditions. I drove home, already planning how I would handle the situation. I would monitor the water pressure at my house, and if it dropped significantly, I would need to make some difficult decisions about how to proceed. The neighborhood's water supply wasn't just a convenience issue. It was a safety issue. People needed water for drinking, cooking, sanitation, and importantly, for their fire suppression systems. Every home in Meadowbrook Estates had a sprinkler system installed as part of the original building code requirements. That evening, I received a call from Jennifer Hartwell, the board member I had spoken to earlier. "Lucas, I've been talking with Patricia about the tractor situation. I want you to know that I'm pushing for an emergency board meeting to address this. When would that happen?" "I'm trying to get everyone together tomorrow, but with the storm, it's difficult. Marcus is out of town at his daughter's place in New Hampshire. Carol Jennings is dealing with a family emergency, and Paul Drummond isn't answering his phone. Jennifer, I need to be clear with you about something. I checked 3 of the 6 access points today, and I'm already seeing lower than optimal pressure readings. I couldn't reach the other 3 points because I can't access them without the tractor. If something goes wrong with the water system during this storm, it could affect the entire neighborhood." "What do you mean by goes wrong?" "Best case scenario, people experience low water pressure. Worst case, a section of the line freezes or a valve fails, and part of the neighborhood loses water entirely until I can fix it. And I can't fix it if I can't reach the access points." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Lucas, I'm going to be honest with you. Patricia has been very aggressive about enforcement since she took over. She believes the previous board was too lenient, and she's trying to establish authority. But I don't think she understood the consequences of seizing your tractor. Let me call her again and see if we can work something out." I appreciate that, Jennifer. The call ended, and I went to check my water pressure. I had installed a gauge on my main line years ago just to monitor things from home. The reading was 38 psi, down from the usual 45. Not critical yet, but moving in the wrong direction. The snow continued throughout the night. I woke up several times to check the pressure gauge, watching as it slowly declined. By 6 in the morning, it was down to 34 psi. I made coffee and stood at my kitchen window, watching the snow pile up outside. The plows from the town public works department would handle the main roads, but the interior streets of Meadowbrook Estates were the HOA's responsibility, and they contracted that work out to a private company. Given the conditions, I doubted those trucks would make it through the neighborhood until late morning at the earliest. At 8 in the morning, my phone started ringing. It was Tom Richardson. "Lucas, do you know anything about the water pressure? My shower was barely working this morning." "Yeah, I know. I've been monitoring it. We're running lower than normal. Can you fix it?" "Not without my tractor. I need to access the remote points to figure out where the problem is originating." Tom muttered something I couldn't quite hear, then said, "I'm calling Patricia right now." This is ridiculous. Over the next hour, I received 6 more calls from neighbors complaining about water pressure. I explained the situation to each of them, and I could hear the frustration building in their voices. By 10 in the morning, the HOA office phone was apparently ringing off the hook because Patricia called me directly. "Mr. Owens, I'm getting reports about water pressure issues throughout the neighborhood. I know. I told you this was going to be a problem. Can you fix it?" "Not without my tractor. I've spoken with the other board members, and we're willing to arrange a temporary release of your equipment so you can address this emergency. However, you'll need to sign an agreement stating that you'll relocate the tractor to an off-site storage location once the immediate crisis is resolved." I felt anger flare up in my chest. "Patricia, I'm not signing anything right now. You created this situation by seizing equipment I use for essential neighborhood maintenance. I warned you this would happen, and you ignored me. Now you want me to agree to conditions before I can fix the problem you caused." "Mr. Owens, I understand you're frustrated, but we need to follow proper procedures. No, what we need to do is restore water service to 247 families. I'll deal with your procedures after that's done. Where's my tractor?" Patricia gave me the address of the storage facility in Williston. I told her I would head over there immediately, and she said she would call ahead to authorize the release. I bundled up in my warmest winter gear, grabbed my tools, and headed out to my truck. The drive to Williston normally took 30 minutes, but in the current conditions, it took over an hour. The main roads were barely passable, with snow still falling and visibility limited to maybe 100 feet. The storage facility was a large industrial complex surrounded by a chain-link fence. I found the office and went inside, where a bored-looking young man sat behind a desk playing on his phone. "I'm here to pick up my tractor," I told him. "Name, Lucas Owens." He typed something into his computer. "Yeah, I got a call about this. Lady from the HOA said to release it to you. But there's still the matter of the fees." "What fees?" "Impound fee, one-night storage, administrative processing. Comes to $425. You've got to be kidding me. The HOA seized my equipment without cause, and now I have to pay to get it back." The kid shrugged. "I just work here, man. You need to take it up with whoever brought it in." I pulled out my credit card, fuming as I paid the fees. The kid printed out a release form, and I went back outside to find my tractor. It was parked in the back corner of the lot, covered in snow. I cleared off the seat, checked the fuel level, and fired it up. The engine turned over smoothly, and I spent a few minutes making sure all the controls were working properly. Driving a tractor through a snowstorm is not an ideal situation, but I didn't have much choice. The trip back to Meadowbrook Estates took even longer than the drive to Williston had taken in my truck. The tractor's top speed was maybe 20 miles per hour on a good day, and in these conditions, I was lucky to maintain 15. Other drivers gave me confused looks as I puttered along Route 2, my hazard lights blinking and the snowplow blade leaving a clear path behind me. It was almost 2 in the afternoon when I finally made it back to the neighborhood. The first thing I did was drive directly to the service road behind the retention pond. With the tractor, the path that had been impossible yesterday was now manageable. The Kubota plowed through the deep snow, its weighted tires finding purchase on the frozen ground beneath. I reached the third access point and immediately saw the problem. The pressure gauge read 28 psi, and when I opened the valve housing completely, I found ice buildup around the main valve stem. The cold snap combined with the pressure drop had caused moisture to freeze in exactly the wrong place. I spent 30 minutes carefully clearing the ice and adjusting the valve, using a small propane torch from my toolkit to warm the metal components. The pressure gauge started climbing slowly, moving from 28 to 30 to 33 psi. Good, but I still needed to check the other access points. I drove the tractor further along the service road, breaking trail through snow that would have been completely impassable in any other vehicle. The fourth access point showed similar issues, more ice buildup and a partially frozen valve. I repeated the clearing process, working as quickly as I could while my fingers went numb inside my gloves. The fifth access point was in better shape, probably because it was located in an area with better drainage that prevented water accumulation. The sixth and final access point was the most remote, located near the north property line, where the subdivision bordered protected conservation land. Getting there required following an old logging road that was barely visible under the snow. The tractor handled it beautifully, and I made a mental note to write a very pointed letter to Patricia about why this equipment was absolutely necessary. The sixth access point had the most significant problem. The valve housing had filled with snow that had then melted and refrozen into a solid block of ice. The pressure gauge was completely frozen and unreadable. I spent over an hour working on this one, using my propane torch, ice picks, and eventually a hammer to break up the ice without damaging the valve assembly. By the time I finished, it was after 5 in the afternoon, and the light was fading fast. The storm had slowed down but not stopped, and the temperature had dropped to 6 degrees. I drove the tractor back to my house, exhausted and cold but satisfied that I had addressed the immediate problems. Inside, I checked my home pressure gauge. It read 42 psi and climbing. The system was recovering. I made myself dinner, took a hot shower, and was just settling onto my couch when the phone rang. It was Jennifer Hartwell again. "Lucas, I wanted to let you know that I've scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow evening at 6. I'm asking the board to formally review Patricia's decision to impound your tractor." "Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. Can you attend the meeting? I think it would be helpful for the board to hear directly from you about the water system maintenance and why the tractor is necessary." "I'll be there." "Good. And Lucas, I want you to know that not everyone on the board supports the way Patricia has been handling things. I think we can get this resolved." The next day, the storm finally cleared, leaving Meadowbrook Estates under more than 30 inches of fresh snow. I spent the morning using my tractor to clear my driveway and then helped several neighbors clear theirs. Word had spread about the water pressure issue, and how Patricia had seized the very equipment needed to fix it, and people were angry. By the time the evening board meeting arrived, the HOA office was packed. The meeting was supposed to be held in the small conference room, but so many residents showed up that they had to move it to the community room at the neighborhood clubhouse. I arrived to find at least 50 people crowded into a space designed for maybe 30. Patricia sat at a table at the front of the room with the other board members: Jennifer Hartwell, Marcus Webb, Carol Jennings, and Paul Drummond. Patricia looked uncomfortable as she surveyed the crowd. She called the meeting to order and tried to start with routine business, but Marcus Webb interrupted her. "Patricia, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Everyone here wants to talk about the water pressure issue and the tractor impound." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "Very well. Mr. Owens, would you like to explain the situation?" I stood up and gave the assembled crowd a detailed explanation of my role maintaining the water system, the contract arrangement that had been in place for 10 years, and why the tractor was essential equipment for that work. I described the access points, the work I had to do during the storm, and the consequences that would have resulted if I hadn't been able to reach those locations. When I finished, Tom Richardson stood up. "I want to know why the HOA president thought it was appropriate to seize equipment that's essential for neighborhood infrastructure maintenance." Patricia looked defensive. "I was enforcing the covenant restrictions on commercial vehicles. Mr. Owens's equipment was in violation." "It's not a commercial vehicle," someone else called out. "He uses it for HOA work." "The covenant doesn't make that distinction," Patricia insisted. Jennifer Hartwell cleared her throat. "Actually, Patricia, I've reviewed the original covenant documents, and there is a provision in Section 12.7 that allows for equipment necessary for HOA maintenance operations. It's right there in the founding documents." Patricia's face flushed. "I didn't see that provision." "That's because you didn't review the complete covenant before you started impounding people's property," Marcus Webb said, his voice hard. "Patricia, I supported your election as president because I thought you would bring organization to the HOA, but this situation has been a disaster. We had dozens of residents without adequate water pressure during a major snowstorm. We're lucky nothing worse happened." "I was trying to enforce community standards," Patricia said, "by ignoring the infrastructure that keeps this community running," Carol Jennings added. She was an older woman who had lived in Meadowbrook Estates since the beginning. Bill Martinez understood that some things are more important than aesthetic rules. We need water more than we need perfectly manicured yards. The meeting devolved into a heated discussion about HOA priorities and Patricia's leadership. Several residents spoke up about violation notices they had received for minor issues, painting a picture of an HOA president more concerned with wielding authority than serving the community. Paul Drummond, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke. "I move that we formally rescind the tractor impound and issue a written apology to Mr. Owens for the disruption and expense this caused him." "I second that motion," Jennifer said immediately. The vote was 4-1, with only Patricia voting against. The motion passed, and I was officially cleared to keep my tractor on my property. Marcus then made another motion requiring all future enforcement actions to be reviewed by at least 2 board members before implementation, which also passed 4-1. Patricia sat stiffly through the rest of the meeting, her authority clearly undermined. As people filed out afterward, several neighbors came up to thank me for maintaining the water system and to apologize that they hadn't known about my role earlier. Tom Richardson clapped me on the shoulder. "Lucas, you should send Patricia a bill for those impound fees you had to pay." "I plan to," I said, But before I could submit that bill, things took an unexpected turn. 2 days after the board meeting, I received a call from a lawyer named Stephen Caldwell. He introduced himself as representing the Meadowbrook Estates HOA in a review of financial records and contracts. "Mr. Owens, I'm calling about your water system maintenance contract. I've been hired by several board members to review the HOA's legal and financial standing, and I've discovered some irregularities in how your contract was structured." My stomach sank. "What kind of irregularities?" "The contract between you and the HOA was never formally approved by a board vote, which is required for any service contract over $1,000 annually. Your contract is $4,800 annually. It appears that Bill Martinez, the previous president, entered into this agreement unilaterally." "Bill had the authority to do that," I said. "The board at the time gave him discretion to handle maintenance contracts. You have documentation of that board authorization." I thought about the filing cabinet in the HOA office, the one Patricia hadn't bothered to review. It should be in the old records. "I've reviewed all the records I could find, Mr. Owens, and I haven't located any such authorization, which means your contract may not be legally valid." "Are you telling me the HOA doesn't have to pay me for the 10 years of work I've done?" "No, you've been paid for past work. But going forward, the contract needs to be properly structured and approved. I'm recommending that the HOA put the water system maintenance contract out for competitive bidding, as required by their bylaws for contracts of this size." I felt like I had just been punched in the gut. "You're firing me." "I'm not firing anyone, Mr. Owens. I'm simply advising the board to follow proper legal procedures. You're welcome to submit a bid when the contract goes out for competitive bidding." After the call ended, I sat at my kitchen table, trying to process what had just happened. I had spent 10 years maintaining the water system for Meadowbrook Estates, working through snowstorms and heat waves, making sure families had clean running water. And now, I was being told that my contract wasn't valid. I called Jennifer Hartwell. "Jennifer, did you know the HOA hired a lawyer to review contracts?" "Yes, Marcus and I thought it was prudent given some of the confusion around Patricia's enforcement actions. We wanted to make sure everything was properly documented." "Why?" I explained what Stephen Caldwell had told me. Jennifer listened quietly, then sighed. "Lucas, I'm sorry. I didn't know this would affect your contract. But if what Stephen says is true, we have to follow proper procedures. It's not personal." "It feels pretty personal, Jennifer. I've been doing this job for a decade." "I know, and everyone appreciates that. But we have fiduciary responsibilities to the HOA members. If contracts weren't properly approved, we need to fix that. The bidding process will be fair. You'll have every opportunity to keep the job." Over the next week, I learned more about the competitive bidding process. The HOA would publish a request for proposals, interested contractors would submit bids, and the board would select the winner based on qualifications and cost. The whole process would take about a month. In the meantime, I was asked to continue maintenance on a week-to-week basis, paid at an hourly rate rather than the monthly contract amount. It was insulting, but I didn't have much choice. The neighborhood still needed someone to maintain the water system. The request for proposals went out in early February. I submitted my bid, detailing my 10 years of experience with the specific Meadowbrook Estates system, my knowledge of each access point, and my availability for emergency response. I proposed a contract amount of $5,000 per year, a modest increase from my previous rate to account for inflation and increased costs. 2 other contractors submitted bids. One was a large commercial plumbing company from Burlington that proposed a contract amount of $12,000 annually. The other was a smaller operation called Green Mountain Utilities Management, which bid $7,500. The board scheduled a special meeting to review the bids and make a selection. I attended, as did representatives from the other two bidders. Patricia Morrison, still technically the HOA president despite her diminished authority, led the discussion. "We have 3 qualified bids before us," she said. "Mr. Owens has experience with our specific system, but his bid lacks the formal certifications and insurance documentation that the other contractors provide. Because I've been doing this job for 10 years without incident," I pointed out. "I have liability insurance through my general homeowner's policy, and I have the manufacturer certifications for the valve systems we use. The larger commercial company has more comprehensive insurance and 24/7 emergency response capability," Patricia continued, clearly favoring anyone other than me. Marcus Webb shook his head. "They also want $12,000 a year, which is 2.5 times what we've been paying. And their representative admitted during the pre-bid site visit that they're not familiar with private residential water systems." "What about Green Mountain Utilities?" Carol Jennings asked. The representative from Green Mountain, a man named Richard Foster, stood up. "We specialize in small community water systems. We maintain 3 other private systems in Chittenden County, and we have the equipment and expertise to handle Meadowbrook Estates. Our bid includes quarterly inspections, emergency response, and all necessary repairs for $7,500 annually." It sounded professional and comprehensive, exactly the kind of pitch that would appeal to a board trying to establish proper procedures. I felt my chances of keeping the contract slipping away. Jennifer Hartwell looked at me. "Lucas, can you match the services that Green Mountain is offering? I've been providing quarterly inspections and emergency response for 10 years. The only difference is they're putting it in writing and charging more for it." The board went into closed session to discuss the bids. I waited outside with the other contractors, trying not to think about what would happen if I lost this contract. It wasn't really about the money, though $4,000 to $5,000 a year was nothing to sneeze at. It was about the principle of being pushed out of a job I had done well for a decade because of procedural technicalities. After 30 minutes, the board called us back in. Patricia announced, "The board has voted to award the water system maintenance contract to Green Mountain Utilities Management. Mr. Owens, we thank you for your years of service and will arrange for a transition period to transfer knowledge and access to the new contractor." I felt numb. Marcus Webb looked uncomfortable, and Jennifer Hartwell wouldn't meet my eyes. Only Carol Jennings seemed willing to look at me directly, and she seemed sympathetic but resigned. Richard Foster shook hands with the board members, looking pleased with himself. I left the meeting without saying anything, not trusting myself to speak without saying something I would regret. The transition period was scheduled for the following week. I met Richard Foster at the first access point, showed him the location and the valve configuration, and explained the specific quirks of that particular installation. He took notes on a tablet computer, nodding along but not asking many questions. We repeated this process at all 6 access points over 2 days. Richard seemed competent enough, but I noticed he arrived in a standard pickup truck without any of the specialized equipment I had mentioned as necessary for winter access to the remote locations. "How are you planning to reach access points 4, 5, and 6 when there's snow?" I asked. "We have a 4-wheel drive truck with snow tires," Richard said. "Should be fine." "Did you actually try driving to those locations during your site visit?" "We walked to most of them." The roads seemed passable. That was during a clear day in early February after the town plows had been through. Try accessing those points during a blizzard and tell me how your four-wheel drive truck does. Richard gave me a patronizing smile. Mr. Owens, I appreciate your concern, but we've been doing this kind of work for years. We know how to handle winter conditions. I finished the knowledge transfer and handed over copies of my maintenance logs and contact information for the valve manufacturers. My formal role with the Meadowbrook Estates water system was over. February passed into March with no major snowstorms, and I heard nothing from the HOA about water system issues. I assumed Green Mountain was handling their responsibilities adequately, though I couldn't help checking my home water pressure gauge more frequently than necessary. Then came the March blizzard. Vermont sometimes gets hit with late-season storms that can be as bad as anything winter delivers, and the March 15th blizzard was one of those. The Weather Service predicted 18 to 24 inches of snow with high winds and temperatures in the low teens. The storm hit on a Tuesday afternoon and continued through Wednesday morning. I spent Tuesday evening monitoring the weather and, admittedly, monitoring my water pressure gauge. Everything seemed fine until about 10 in the evening, when I noticed the pressure starting to drop. It went from 45 psi to 42, then to 38 over the course of an hour. I called Richard Foster's emergency number. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. I left a message explaining the pressure drop and the need to check the access points. I waited 30 minutes and called again. This time Richard answered, sounding annoyed. "Mr. Owens, what can I do for you? The water pressure is dropping across the system. Someone needs to check the access points. It's 10:30 at night in the middle of a blizzard. We'll send someone out in the morning when conditions improve." Richard, by morning you could have frozen valves or worse. This needs to be addressed now. Our policy is not to send technicians out in dangerous weather conditions. The morning will be fine. Your contract says 24/7 emergency response. Emergency response doesn't mean suicide missions in blizzards. We'll be there first thing in the morning. Thank you for calling. He hung up. I stared at my phone, then at the pressure gauge, which now read 36 psi and still dropping. I knew exactly what was happening. The cold temperatures combined with the pressure drop meant ice was building up somewhere in the system, probably at one of the remote access points where water had accumulated. I checked the weather radar on my phone. The storm was supposed to continue until at least 6 in the morning. By then, the damage could be severe. I thought about calling the HOA board members, but what would they do? They had hired Green Mountain specifically because they were supposed to be more professional and capable than me. At 11:15, my phone rang. It was Tom Richardson. "Lucas, my water pressure is almost nothing. What's going on?" "There's an issue with the system. I called the contractor, but they won't come out until morning." "Can you fix it?" "Tom, I don't have the contract anymore. So we're just supposed to deal with no water because some company won't do their job." Before I could answer, my phone beeped with another call. Then another. Over the next 30 minutes, I received calls from 7 different neighbors, all reporting low or no water pressure. The last call was from Jennifer Hartwell. "Lucas, I'm getting flooded with calls about the water." "What's happening?" I explained the situation, including my conversation with Richard Foster. Jennifer was silent for a moment, then said, "Can you fix it?" "Jennifer, the HOA fired me, remember? You hired Green Mountain to handle this." "I know, but they're not handling it." "Lucas, we have families without water in the middle of a blizzard. I'm asking you, as a neighbor and a human being, can you help?" I looked out my window at the snow coming down sideways, driven by winds that were probably gusting to 40 miles per hour. Then I looked at the pressure gauge, which now read 32 psi. I thought about the families in the neighborhood, including kids and elderly residents, facing a night without water. "I'll see what I can do," I said. I bundled up in every piece of winter gear I owned, grabbed my tool kit, and went out to my tractor. The conditions were even worse than I expected, with visibility down to maybe 20 feet and snow accumulating at a rate of about 2 inches per hour. I fired up the Kubota, grateful that I had kept it maintained and ready despite no longer having the contract. The first 3 access points showed minor issues, slightly low pressure but nothing critical. I made small adjustments and cleared some ice buildup, watching the pressure improve incrementally. The 4th access point was where I found the main problem. The service road was completely buried under nearly 2 feet of snow, with drifts in some places reaching 4 feet. There was no way Richard Foster's 4-wheel drive pickup was getting through here, not until the roads were properly plowed, which wouldn't happen until after the storm ended. My tractor handled it, slowly but steadily, pushing through the snow and creating a path. At access point 4, I found a nightmare scenario. The valve housing had flooded, and the entire assembly was encased in ice. The pressure gauge was frozen solid, and I could hear the valve stem creaking under stress. If that valve failed completely, the entire northern section of the neighborhood would lose water. I spent 2 hours working on that valve in conditions that were genuinely dangerous. The wind chill was probably 30 below zero, and my hands kept going numb even inside thick gloves. I used my propane torch to slowly melt the ice, working carefully to avoid thermal shocking the metal components and causing them to crack. Finally, around 3 in the morning, I got the valve freed and functioning properly. I checked the pressure gauge at my tractor-mounted monitoring system and watched it climb to 40 psi, then 43. The system was recovering. I drove to access points 5 and 6 just to be thorough, found minor issues that I addressed quickly, and then started the long drive home. I arrived back at my house at 5:30 in the morning, exhausted and half frozen. I made hot coffee, took a shower that lasted until the hot water tank was nearly empty, and fell into bed. I woke up at noon to find my phone full of messages. Neighbors thanking me for restoring the water. Jennifer Hartwell asking me to call her. Marcus Webb saying the board wanted to meet with me. And one message from Richard Foster that just said, "We need to talk." I called Jennifer first. "Lucas, thank you for what you did last night. I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't been willing to help. You would have had a neighborhood without water, that's what. I know. And I'm embarrassed that it came to this. The board is meeting tonight to discuss the situation. Will you be there? Do I need to be? I think you should be." That evening, I drove to the HOA office for what felt like the 100th time in 2 months. The board was already assembled, and to my surprise, Richard Foster was there too, looking uncomfortable. Patricia Morrison started the meeting. "Mr. Owens, thank you for coming. We've asked you here to discuss the water system emergency that occurred during the storm. Mr. Foster has informed us that Green Mountain Utilities was unable to respond to the emergency due to weather conditions." "That's a nice way of saying they refused to do the job they were contracted to do," I said. Richard Foster cleared his throat. "Mr. Owens, I want to clarify that we didn't refuse. We made a judgment call about safety. Our policy is not to send technicians out in conditions that pose unreasonable risk. I went out in those same conditions and fixed the problem. Yes, and frankly, that was reckless. You could have been injured or killed, but I wasn't, and the neighborhood has water because of it." Marcus Webb interrupted. Let's focus on the core issue. Green Mountain, your contract explicitly states 24/7 emergency response. Last night was clearly an emergency, and you didn't respond. We responded as quickly as conditions safely allowed, Richard insisted. We had a crew ready to go out at 8 this morning. By which point the damage could have been severe, Jennifer Hartwell said. Mr. Foster, I don't think this is working out. The whole reason we went through the competitive bidding process was to ensure more reliable service than what we thought we were getting. But it turns out the service we were getting was actually quite good, and we didn't appreciate it until it was gone. Patricia Morrison looked like she wanted to argue, but Marcus spoke first. I move that we terminate the contract with Green Mountain Utilities Management for failure to provide adequate emergency response as specified in the agreement. Second, Carol Jennings said immediately. The vote was 4-1, with Patricia abstaining. Richard Foster tried to argue about breach of contract and payment terms, but Marcus cut him off. Mr. Foster, you failed to respond to an emergency that could have left 247 families without water. We'll pay you for the work completed to date, but the contract is terminated effective immediately. Richard gathered his things and left, muttering about lawyers. After he was gone, Jennifer turned to me. Lucas, I know we haven't treated you fairly through this process. The board made mistakes, and we're sorry for that. We'd like to offer you the water system maintenance contract again, properly structured this time with formal board approval and appropriate documentation. At what rate? We were paying Green Mountain $7,500. We're prepared to offer you $6,000 annually, plus reimbursement for any materials and emergency response fees for situations like last night. I thought about it. The offer was fair, actually better than what I had been making before. But I was tired of the HOA politics and the constant second-guessing. I want something else too. What's that? I want a written acknowledgement from the board that my tractor and any other equipment necessary for water system maintenance is explicitly allowed under the covenant, with no restrictions on storage or use. I don't want to go through another situation where someone decides my equipment is a violation. The board members looked at each other. Finally, Patricia spoke up. I can agree to that, and Mr. Owens, I owe you an apology. I made a mistake when I impounded your tractor. I was trying to enforce standards without understanding the full context, and I caused problems for you and for the entire neighborhood. I'm sorry. It wasn't the most gracious apology I'd ever heard, but it seemed sincere enough. Apology accepted. Marcus Webb drew up the contract terms right there, and all 5 board members signed it along with me. I walked out of the HOA office that night with a properly structured contract, fair compensation, and protection for my equipment. More importantly, I had a neighborhood that now understood and appreciated the work I did to keep their water running. The story should have ended there, but there was one more twist coming. In April, about a month after I resumed the water system maintenance contract, I received a certified letter from something called the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, Water Supply Division. The letter informed me that the Meadowbrook Estates water system had been operating without proper state licensing. According to Vermont regulations, any private community water system serving more than 25 connections was required to be licensed and inspected by the state, with regular water quality testing and reporting. Meadowbrook Estates, with its 247 homes, definitely qualified. The letter went on to say that the state had become aware of the situation following an inquiry from a concerned citizen. An inspection had been scheduled for May 3rd, and the HOA would need to provide documentation of all system specifications, maintenance records, and water quality testing for the past 5 years. I called Jennifer Hartwell immediately. "Jennifer, did you get a letter from the state about water system licensing?" "Yes, it arrived today." "Lucas, did you know we were supposed to be licensed?" "No, I had no idea. I've been maintaining the physical system, but nobody ever mentioned licensing or water quality testing." "Who reported us to the state?" I had a pretty good guess about that, but I didn't want to speculate. It turned out I didn't have to wait long for confirmation. The next day, Tom Richardson forwarded me an email that was circulating through the neighborhood. It was from Patricia Morrison, sent to her personal mailing list of residents who had supported her HOA presidency campaign. The email read, "Dear neighbors, I want you to know that I have taken steps to protect our community by reporting the HOA's unlicensed water system to the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. For years, our water supply has been maintained by an unqualified individual without proper oversight or safety testing. I believe we deserve to know that our water is safe, and I hope the state inspection will force the current board to take these issues seriously." I read the email twice, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Patricia had gone from seizing my tractor to questioning my qualifications to reporting the entire HOA to the state, and she was framing it as a public safety crusade. The May 3rd inspection was thorough and concerning. 2 state environmental engineers spent 4 hours examining the water system, reviewing what maintenance records existed, and taking water samples from multiple locations throughout the neighborhood. They interviewed me about my maintenance procedures and asked detailed questions about water testing protocols. The answer to those questions was simple. There weren't any. In all the years I had maintained the system, nobody had ever discussed water quality testing. I had assumed the HOA was handling that aspect, and apparently the HOA had assumed someone else was handling it, or possibly hadn't known it needed to be handled at all. 3 weeks later, the HOA received the inspection report. It was not good. The state found multiple violations, including no operator's license for the water system, failure to conduct required bacteriological testing, failure to conduct required chemical testing, inadequate documentation of system maintenance, missing or incomplete system specifications, and failure to submit required annual reports. The report concluded with a compliance order requiring the HOA to correct all violations within 90 days or face daily fines of $500. The HOA also had to hire a licensed water system operator, implement a testing schedule, and submit detailed remediation plans to the state. Jennifer Hartwell called an emergency board meeting, which quickly turned into an emergency neighborhood meeting as word spread about the state's findings. The clubhouse was packed again, but this time the mood was different. People were scared. Nobody wanted to think their drinking water might be unsafe. Jennifer stood at the front of the room and read through the inspection report, trying to present the information calmly. "The good news is that the preliminary water tests came back clean. There's no immediate health risk. The issue is that we haven't been conducting regular testing to ensure ongoing safety." "How did this happen?" someone called out. It appears that when the subdivision was originally developed, the builder was supposed to set up the licensing and testing procedures before turning the system over to the HOA. But that transition happened during the 2008 financial crisis, when the development company went bankrupt. A lot of details fell through the cracks. So what do we do now? We need to hire a licensed water system operator, which is going to cost money. We need to implement regular testing, which is also going to cost money. And we need to bring the entire system up to state standards, which is definitely going to cost money. Marcus Webb stood up with a stack of papers. I've gotten preliminary quotes from 3 licensed operators. The cheapest option is $8,000 per year. Testing costs will add another $3,000 annually. And we need to install some additional monitoring equipment to meet state standards, which is a one-time cost of about $15,000. The room erupted in concerned chatter. That was $26,000 in immediate and ongoing costs that nobody had budgeted for. The HOA's annual budget was about $90,000, covering road maintenance, snow removal, landscaping for common areas, and administrative costs. This would require a significant increase in HOA dues. How much are our dues going up? Tom Richardson asked. Based on these numbers, we're looking at an increase of about $15 per month per household, Jennifer said. That's going from $75 to $90 monthly. The grumbling got louder. I sat in the back of the room thinking about the numbers. Then I raised my hand. Jennifer saw me and nodded. Lucas, do you have something to add? I stood up. I might have a solution, or at least a partial solution. I can get licensed as a water system operator. It requires taking a course and passing a state exam, but it's not impossibly difficult. If the HOA pays for my licensing and training, I can handle the operator requirements as part of my existing maintenance contract. How much would that save us? Marcus asked. The $8,000 for the licensed operator, plus you'd have someone who already knows this specific system intimately. I'd need a modest increase in my contract to cover the additional responsibilities, maybe $2,000 more per year. That brings the annual additional cost down from $11,000 to about $5,000, plus the one-time equipment cost. The board members looked at each other. Jennifer said, Lucas, would you be willing to do that? Yes, but on one condition. I want Patricia Morrison held accountable for reporting the HOA to the state without exhausting other options first. Patricia, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. I was protecting the community. Someone needed to ensure our water was safe. You were retaliating, I said. You sent that email to your supporters before the inspection even happened, framing this as a safety issue when you knew it was about politics. If you were genuinely concerned about water safety, you could have brought it up at a board meeting. You could have suggested we look into licensing requirements. Instead, you went straight to the state and caused a crisis. I have the right to contact state agencies if I have concerns. You have the right, but that doesn't mean it was the right thing to do, Tom Richardson said, standing up beside me. Patricia, you've been nothing but trouble since you became president. You seized Lucas's tractor over a technicality. You've sent out dozens of petty violation notices. You supported firing Lucas from the maintenance contract he'd been handling perfectly well for 10 years. And now this. I think it's time for you to resign from the board. Several other residents voiced their agreement. Patricia looked around the room, her face flushed. I don't have to resign. I was elected for a 3-year term. Marcus Webb pulled out a copy of the HOA bylaws. Actually, Patricia, according to Section 9.3, board members can be removed by a 2/3 vote of the residents at a properly noticed meeting. We're going to schedule a special election for next month to address your position. The special election was held on June 7th. I didn't expect Patricia to resign voluntarily, and she didn't, forcing an actual vote. The results were overwhelming. 84% of voting residents supported removing her from the board. Patricia was out, and Carol Jennings was elected to serve out the remainder of her term as president. Meanwhile, I enrolled in the Vermont Water System Operator course, a 6-week program covering everything from basic hydraulics to water quality testing to regulatory compliance. I attended classes 2 evenings per week and spent my weekends studying. The material was more complex than I expected, but also fascinating. I learned things about the Meadowbrook Estates system that I hadn't fully understood during my years of maintenance work. In late July, I took the state licensing exam and passed with a score of 89%. I was now officially a licensed water system operator, authorized to manage systems serving up to 500 connections. The state approved my licensing for Meadowbrook Estates, and I began implementing proper testing protocols. The first full round of comprehensive water testing cost about $1,200 and took 2 weeks to complete. We tested for bacteria, chemicals, heavy metals, and various other contaminants. When the results came back, I was relieved to see that everything was well within safe limits. The system I had been maintaining by instinct and basic knowledge was actually in good shape. The HOA installed the required monitoring equipment in August, upgrading the access points with automated pressure sensors and flow meters that could alert me to problems before they became critical. The $15,000 expense was significant, but the board managed to find the money by deferring some non-essential landscaping projects and drawing from the HOA's reserve fund. By September, the Meadowbrook Estates water system was fully compliant with state regulations. I submitted the required annual report to the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, documenting system specifications, maintenance activities, and water quality testing results. The state sent an inspector for a follow-up visit in October, and we passed with no violations. The whole ordeal had cost the neighborhood money and stress, but in the end, we had a safer, better documented water system. And I had a new professional credential that increased my value not just to Meadowbrook Estates, but potentially to other communities as well. In November, I received a call from a subdivision about 10 miles away, asking if I would be interested in consulting on their water system setup. Word had gotten around about what happened in Meadowbrook Estates, and other HOAs were suddenly interested in making sure their infrastructure was properly maintained and licensed. I agreed to take on the consulting work, which provided additional income and spread my expertise beyond just my own neighborhood. Looking back on everything that happened, from Patricia seizing my tractor in January to becoming a licensed water system operator by summer, I realized how much had changed. The HOA had learned that infrastructure maintenance wasn't something to take for granted. The neighbors had learned to appreciate the unglamorous work that kept their community functioning. And I had learned that sometimes crisis leads to opportunity. Patricia Morrison moved out of Meadowbrook Estates in December, selling her house and relocating to somewhere in Massachusetts. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was joining the HOA board in her new community, which I found both amusing and concerning for her new neighbors. The following January, a year after the tractor seizure, Vermont got hit with another major snowstorm. I was ready, with my Kubota tractor properly maintained and my licensed operator credentials in order. I spent the night of the storm checking access points, monitoring pressure gauges, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. By morning, while other neighborhoods were dealing with frozen pipes and water outages, Meadowbrook Estates had full water service. Tom Richardson called me that morning. "Lucas, I just wanted to say thank you, not just for last night, but for everything this past year. You could have walked away when the HOA treated you badly, but you didn't. The neighborhood is lucky to have you." "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. Also, Carol asked me to tell you that the board approved your request for a new storage shed behind your house. You can keep your tractor maintenance equipment in there without any covenant violations." I laughed. "That's good to know. though at this point I think everyone understands why I need the equipment. Oh, we understand. Believe me, we understand. I hung up the phone and looked out at my snow-covered neighborhood, thinking about all the pipes and valves and pressure points hidden beneath the frozen ground, all working together to deliver clean water to every home. It wasn't glamorous work, and most people never thought about it until something went wrong. But it was important work, essential work, and I was proud to do it. The tractor sat in my driveway, ready for the next storm, the next emergency, the next time the neighborhood needed someone to venture out into impossible conditions to keep the water flowing. And this time, nobody was going to take it away.